Hello, everyone. I am Jessica, and I'm an alcoholic. We are on week 7. Actually, technically, this is week 8. We were on week 7 last week with how it works, which is step 3. The material in our book was actually very long, so we did not get through all of it. So what we're going to go to today is just going to go through the last remaining pages that we didn't finish, and then we're going to jump into week 8 if we have time, which would be chapter 5. And fortunately, week 8 and week 9, the next 2 sessions are short. So if I don't finish today, we'll combine the next 2 next week. So I am going to start off with our meeting format as always and our prayer. So let me just make sure I'm sharing my screen with everybody. And it looks like I am just here myself today. So I'm just recording this just for anyone that doesn't want to miss any sessions. So my name is Jessica and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to the Big Book Workshop. We as leaders do not consider ourselves to be the gurus of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, nor do we consider ourselves to be experts in anything at all. For those who care to, please join me in a moment of silence to remind us why we are still here and for the alcoholic who still suffers. God, let me set aside everything I know about you, AA, myself, and my disease, for an open mind and a new experience. Let me be honest and thorough. Amen. For the first couple of weeks, we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves in order to get to know one another. Obviously, we won't do that since I am recording this by myself. The purpose of this workshop is to experience the recovery process as outlined in the Big Book of AA, either for the first time or again, so that we may better carry out and understand our primary purpose, which is to stay sober and carry the message to the still suffering alcoholic. We are here to talk about recovery only and go through the 12-step process as outlined in the Big Book of AA. This is not an emotional or intellectual exercise. This is a spiritual exercise so that we can recover the experience of recovery process as we read it together. It is recommended that anything you hear here that cannot be reconciled in the Big Book, 12 and 12, or AA-approved literature simply be ignored. So we left off last week on page 107. Let me make sure I'm on the correct page. Okay, so last week we learned that, a life run on self-will can hardly be a success. So we're going to keep jumping back into that. So we are at the top of page 107. So somewhere we got the idea that wrongs meant a list of dirty, filthy, nasty items. But if you go to the dictionary and look it up, you'll find several definitions of it. Wrong equals incorrect judgment of other people, resentment. Wrong is incorrect believing, which equals fear. And wrong are the harms and hurts we do to other people. Now, it's easy to spot a selfish, self-centered human being. One who is running on self-will, not running on God's will. A selfish, self-centered human being is always madder than hell. Damn him, damn her, by God, I'll show them. They're not going to treat me that way. A selfish, self-centered human being is always scared to death. They can't depend on God. They can't depend on other people. And if we are an alcoholic reaching the end of the road, we can't depend on ourselves any longer, running absolutely scared to death all the time. A selfish, self-centered human being, in order to fulfill the basic instincts of life, are always overdoing, creating harms and hurts for others. Then we've got to be scared to death of what we're going to do when they catch us. And even if they don't catch us, if God dwells within each of us, we know the difference between right and wrong, and the guilt and remorse associated with those things begin to eat us up. A person whose mind is filled with resentment, a person whose mind is filled with fear, a person whose mind is filled with guilt and remorse does not feel good. Eventually, searching for a better way, we begin to think about the sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a couple of drinks. Next thing you know, we believe we can drink and we end up drunk all over again. So at the very least, we're going to have to do something about this self-centered human being. And it seems the only way we can do anything about that is through God's help, because God made self-will. Only God has the power to overcome that. And at the very least, we're going to have to do something about these resentments and these fears and this guilt and remorse in order to find the peace of mind, serenity, and happiness for good long-term sobriety. If every human being in the world today could fulfill these 3 basic instincts at the level that God intends, there would be no conflict on earth today. But all human beings have self-will. All human beings from time to time will overdo it in one or more areas, creating conflict for others and for themselves. I never knew that. I just knew I was always in trouble. I knew I was always madder than hell. I knew I was always scared to death. I knew guilt and remorse was eating me up, but I didn't know where it came from. See, they gave me the rules, but they never taught me how to play the game. AA has taught me how to play the game. And I know how to play the game. I don't break the rules anymore, and I don't hurt other people. And I'm not scared to death, and I'm not filled with guilt and remorse. And that is the greatest information I have ever seen. And what makes me tick and what causes me to do the things that I do. In the big book, page 62 says, whatever our protestations, are not most of us concerned with ourselves, our resentments, and our self-pity? It's not that we thought too well, or it's not that I thought too well of myself, or that I thought too little of myself. It's that I thought of myself only, and that was a problem. I'm gonna read that again. It's not that I thought too well of myself or that I thought too little of myself. It's that I thought of myself only. That was my problem. That is a very profound statement and very true. Again, on page 62, it says, selfishness, self-centeredness. What we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation, but invariably that we find that sometime in the past we've made the decision based on self, which later place us in a position to be hurt. You know, alcoholism. I, self, me. You see, if we don't have a God in your life, and I didn't, there's only one left thing to live by, and that's a satisfaction of these basic instincts of life. And I tried to live my life based upon the satisfaction of those basic instincts. And I overdid in many, many of those areas. Again, on page 62. So our troubles, we think, are basically our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of a self-run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must rid of this selfishness. We must. You see that Bill uses the word must there, or it kills us. God makes that possible. I can't heal my sick mind with a sick mind. Only God can make that possible. Continuing on page 62, and there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them, even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. This is how and the why of it. You see, he told how it works. Then he told us why it won't work because of the selfishness and self-centeredness. Now he's going to tell us how it really works. So this is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Everything I read leads me to believe that this is a God-directed world. Now, if it was God-directed, then those of us who had been self-centered and those of us who had tried to quit everything and everybody around us, or direct everything around us, we've been trying to do God's job for him. We are not God. We have just been playing at being God. And the book says we're going to have to quit doing that if we want to have peace of mind, serenity, and happiness in the future, I think. One of the great mistakes I see in AA is people trying to force themselves to be better. And self-will cannot overcome self-will. Only God can overcome self-will. So if we want any peace of mind, serenity, and happiness, it looks like we're going to have to turn to God and let him be the director. Let him do his job, which is the next direction. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. Not our suggester, our director. From here on out, it'll be directions and not suggestions. Continue on page 62. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the father, and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone and the new and triumphant arch of which we pass to freedom. And we're right here. And what it is, that idea of this concept, that he is the principal and we are his agents. He is the father and we are his children. He is the boss. I work for him. Now, when I first got into the area of step 3, I used God like you would an errand boy. I said, God, please help me stay sober. And by the way, while you're at it, help me get my wife back. Which one? The second one. I don't want the first one back. First one didn't drink. I mean, and she was mean and ugly. I like the one that drank. God, get me a job. By the way, pick up a little extra money for me. I need some money. I used God like you would an errand boy. I sent him out like that. And after I got sober, I got into reading that other book, that but big book in the front of the book. There's a story about this fellow who worked 6 days and rested. Now, to my knowledge, he didn't go back to work anymore. So it looks as if there is any work being done around here is going to be me doing the work. He is the principal. We are the agents. He is the father. We are the children. He is the boss. I am the employee. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was keystone of the new and triumphant art of which we pass to freedom. Now, he is referring once again, wonderfully effective spiritual culture. Step 1 of willingness, which is our foundation, and step 2 is believing, which is the cornerstone. Now he tells us what we're building, a triumphant arch of which we're going to pass to freedom. And he said the keystone to the arch is a simple idea that we're going to let God be the director. You know, in the old days, they built arches. The stones are all stacked loosely without mortar. And they began to lean together, and there's a center stone up here called the keystone. If it was cut right, it would support the entire arch. But if it wasn't, it would slip out and the arch would collapse. Well, the keystone of the new and triumphant arch, which we're going to pass to freedom, is a simple little idea that we're going to let God be the director. For most of us, that's the first time we've ever had that idea. If at once is his children, we lost it somewhere. Instead of letting God be the director, we were the director because we told God what we wanted. God, do this. God, do that. God, give me this. God, give me that. God, if you do this for me, I'll do that for you. Not only did we direct God, but we directed everybody around us. Now we can quit doing that. We're going to let God be the boss from this day on. And that is a radical idea for people like us. This is the decision that we are making. On page 63, it says, when we sincerely took a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new emperor. Being our all-powerful, he provided what we needed. If we kept close to him and performed his work well, established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves and our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing how we could contribute to life. Now, you see, I was always a taker, and takers are losers in life. Contributors are those that win, I've noticed. On page 63, it continues to say, as we felt a new power flow in, we enjoyed peace of mind. As we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or hereafter. We were reborn. You know how they used to come over to my house on Monday night on that little church about 2 blocks from my house, and these guys wanted to talk to me about being reborn? And you know what I did for them? I'm drinking, and man, it's Monday Night Football, and they'll be talking about Reborn on 8 o'clock, and they'll be knocking, and I'd run them off and say, you guys get out of here. It's Monday Night Football. I don't want to talk to you. Get. And that's the way I did those guys. And I understand this Reborn. I didn't understand this Reborn thing at all. And then I began reading the other book. And when I got sober, there's this story of this guy's name, Nicodemus. And Nicodemus was about like me, just dumber than a stump. And he asked that guy, what do you mean by being reborn? Do you mean I've got to get back into my mother's womb? See how dumb he was? And then he looked at him and shook his head and said, Nicodemus, don't you know you can't do that? Didn't you go to the university? Aren't you educated? You can't do that. When I'm talking about reborn, I'm talking about the renewing of your mind. Old ideas cast aside, new ones accepted. Reborn in my mind. I understood that then, and I'm ready to do business, and I was ready to do the third step. And I knew what they did on Sunday morning, that little church up there about 11 o'clock, and I couldn't wait to get till I got there. And basically asked people to come down and do the third step prayer. So I waited till next Sunday. I got there about 3 or 4 minutes till 11, and I didn't want to get there too early because I might hear something that would help me. Got there about 3 or 4 minutes to 11 to make sure enough that people asked to do that, and I came down there and I did, and just as the book says on page 63, we were now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker as we understood him, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those that I would help of thy power, thy love, and of thy way of life. May I do thy will always. We thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, and that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. That is the third step prayer. And I don't know what exactly happened that particular morning, but I do know this. From Sunday morning until this moment, my life hasn't been the same, as if I had been walking on the dark side of the street all those years, and suddenly I'm on the sunny side of the street. And I didn't know what to happen, except I do know that my life has changed. Thank God. Well, we thought well before taking this step that we were ready, and we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. I think the word utterly means completely, wholeheartedly, all the way, the entire ball of wax. I hope you didn't make the mistake I did. The first time I took step 3, I got on my knees, which I seldom did in those days, and I said, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage itself, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, so on, and so forth. And as I finish it up, I said, now this applies to my alcohol. Don't fool with my sex life. Stay out of my money. I can handle that too. God probably said, what an order. I can't go through with it. I said, you take the alcohol and I'll take care of the rest. Today I realized the fallacy that is, as far as I know, God doesn't even drink and don't want the alcohol. He wants me and he wants all of me. Just think, if God could direct my thinking in all areas, it might even become better in my sex life. It might become better in my money areas. It might become better in all areas. When my thinking becomes better in all areas, then surely my life will become better in all areas too. I think there's a valid reason behind this. I am told that we alcoholics are born to live in 3 dimensions. We're born to live with God, ourselves, and our fellow human beings. And if we are praying with other human beings for the first time, we are beginning to get ourselves back together in 3 dimensions the way God intended in the first place. We are alcoholics. We alcoholics are the funniest people in the world. We let our family see us on the knees in the bathroom, hugging the porcelain toilet, puking our guts up, morning after morning after morning. We come to AA to try to straighten our lives out, and we're ashamed and embarrassed to let people see us in prayer. Isn't that something? Delusional, the insanity. Praying in the company of other human beings is always better. Anybody I work with or sponsor are required to take step 3 with me for 2 reasons. Number 1, if they take it with me, I know they have taken it. And the only way I know for sure. But the real reason is every time we do it together, it means more to me. And it has more strength and more power for me. And I think that's a great idea. So we've made our decision, we've uttered our prayers, and the book says. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action. The first step, which is personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Through our decision, step 3, was a vital and crucial step. It could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom, and we had to get down to the causes and conditions. So that only took about 15 minutes. So we do have the rest of the session to get through week 8, which is keeping us right on track. So let me get rid of this document here, and I'm going to pull up the next one in just a second. Week 8. Okay. I did make a couple notes when I was reading this myself. We finished step 3, so we're going to move on to step 4 here now shortly. When you make that decision to turn your will and your lives over to the care of God as we understand him, it's not just a one-time decision. You don't just make that decision that day and forget about it. A lot of times in sobriety, and this is just with my experience, I have to make that decision every day, sometimes multiple a day. It can be as cliche as 1 day at a time, 1 hour at a time. When I made that decision to turn my will over to the care of God, it means I'm no longer playing God. So, as we say many times throughout the day, thy will be done, not mine. That's making that decision again. That's reminding ourselves of that decision. And that is a decision that I have to make all the time because, sometimes when those thoughts creep back in your head, we have to, we've made a decision for once in our lives and we're sticking to it. And that's God's running the show and we're not. So now we are going to move on to week 8. So I already pulled that up here. Just for a recap of the notes, because we're going to start talking about resentments. Resentment means to feel. or sentiment means to feel, or sentiri, it's an old word. So resentment is to refeel. So we've made our decision. Now our next is action, which is the personal housekeeping. So the first three steps have little or no effect without action, like it says on the page we just read, where it says, through our decision, step 3, it was a vital and crucial step. It could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous course of action, essentially. There's no time element between steps 3 and 4. There's nothing in the big book or anything in the 12 and 12 or AA approved literature that says you have to wait a certain amount of time. I know for me, I did kind of sit on step 4 for a little bit, not intentionally, but if I could go back, I probably would have worked it a little faster than I did. But, you know, I hear it all the time that people can't get through the first 3 steps, or they sit on it, or they're just waiting to get to step 4. And every day that we put it off is a day that we are going to feel guilt, shame, and remorse. And the next thing is we drink again. So, you know, we hear all kinds of answers that people wait 30 days, 90 days, a year to do the steps. Their sponsor is having them wait. And basically, just personal experiences with that statement right there. How many people have died? Or as sponsors, how many people have we killed with that statement? Honestly, the steps are a life raft. There's no time to wait, especially if you're a real alcoholic like me. If I would have waited much longer than I did to get into that 4th step, I truly believe I would have drank or died, honestly. So if we knew that we may drink if we don't finish the steps, why do we wait? And a lot of it's fear, which we're going to go over. And, you know, a lot of this fear is what we tell the newcomer. We tell the newcomer how tough this 4th step is and scare the death out of them. And, you know, there's really nothing to be afraid of. And even if we don't scare the hell out of them, you know, why do they wait? Another answer would be like confusion. We don't do it, or we don't see this 4-step instructions, that are so simple that we become confused, and that we just don't want to do it. We overcomplicate things so much. So just as someone like me, I'm willing to sponsor, and as my sponsor did for me, we didn't wait. She didn't scare me to death. The instructions are clear and simple in the big book. If we follow them, there's no reason to overcomplicate them. And that is our job, to carry the message to the next alcoholic that this is nothing to be afraid of. This will save your life. And they are simple. We tend to overcomplicate things. So enough of my rant. We're going to get into week 8 here. So it wants us to read paragraph 4 on page 63. So actually on page 63, paragraph 3, that's the end of step 3. So now we're in step 4. So paragraph 4. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action. The first step, which is personal housekeeping, which many of us had never attempted. So there has always been God's will. There's always been my will. Have we been operating on God's will all the time? But there seems to have been something in my will within my mind that blocked me from God's will. If I'm going to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand him, I'm first going to have to find out what it is within me that's blocking me from God's will and do something about it, which before God can begin to direct my thinking. And then we can open up the space in our head for God's will to come into our minds. A time element is involved in this paragraph. It says, take this step at once, which we just reiterated. We heard a professional counselor say counseling people not long ago to wait 2 or 3 years after their inventory, or to question him, how many people have you killed with that advice? That's exactly what we were just saying. So picture this. You've been shot 7 times in a critical area of the body. You're being wheeled into the ER, bleeding profusely. You go to your surgeon and say, let's give him 90 days to see if he heals up on his own. Or do you hear him say, get him into the OR stat. We have to save people's lives today. Remember, this is a matter of life and death. We're going to try to have to find a New peace of mind, serenity, and happiness. As long as we are running our lives on self-will, we can't have peace of mind. We didn't have it before we got here on self-will, and the longer I put off taking step 4, the greater the chance of me getting drunk is. So when we think of the reasons why we procrastinate or put it off is fear. Fear that we dare not look at this stuff and we sure don't want to show it to somebody else. Fear that we can't do it perfectly and we'd rather wait until we could do it right. If that is our only reason for not taking step 4, then what we're really saying is, let's get well first and then we'll do it. But the reality is we need to do step 4 in order to get well. I relate with that a lot. I see that a lot in meetings, and people around me. I really do. Another reason that we put it off is we don't know how to do it, the confusion. So somewhere along the line, we're looking at step 5, and there's a statement that says something about your entire life story. So we said, aha, that's it. We've taken a statement out of step 5 and began to write our life story as our inventory on step 4. I did that when I first had tried to take the inventory, but I didn't learn a thing because everything I wrote down, I already knew. I learned nothing new by writing my life story. As I look back on it now, I realize that 95% of doesn't have to do with my drinking anyway. That 95% of my story obscured the 5% that did have everything to do with my drinking. So I love how Joe and Charlie put that. On page 64, paragraph 1. Therefore, we started a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding, a fact-facing process. It is an effort to discover the truth about the stock and trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsellable goods, to get rid of them promptly without regret. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. So I'm going to keep my bookmark in here. It looks like it wants us to do some more reading. So Bill is going to tell us to take a business inventory, assuming that we know something about business. Then he tells us how to take a business inventory. He's going to turn around and say that we do the same thing with our lives. In other words, we're going to take personal inventory like he tells us with this business. He says a business takes no regular inventory goes broke. So, I just understood that. He says a business that takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. This is his first valid comparisons between business inventory and personal inventory. That is spot on, literally and figuratively. In our personal lives, you and I have a business, which is the most important business in the world, and that is the business of finding a way of life where we can be sober and peaceful and happy and free and not go back to drinking. If we don't inventory ourselves regularly, then we may as well end up going broke, which is going to get us drunk all over again. So the first comparison between the two would be that without inventory, we'd probably go broke or get drunk, just like a business goes broke. Now, Bill says taking a commercial inventory is fact-finding and fact-facing process. So step 4, personal versus business inventory comparisons. On the right side, we put personal. On the left side, we put business. A commercial inventory is 1, fact-finding, and 2, fact-facing process. It is a 3, effort to discover the truth about 4, the stock and trade. The object is to 5, disclose damage or unsellable goods. To 6, get rid of them promptly without regret. And it is the only way the business can be successful. We cannot fool ourselves about values. We have taken some keywords and put them under business. Fact-finding, fact-facing, truth about the stock and trade. Your effort to disclose damage or unsellable goods. You get rid of them promptly without regret. Now Bill says we did exactly the same thing with our lives. We did with our lives what he told us to do with the business inventory. Now, Bill loves words, and he loves words that mean the same thing. So let's look at step 4. We made a 1, searching. We put this straight across from fact-finding. They basically mean the same thing. 2, fearless. We put this word straight across from fact-facing. 3, moral. We saw that word moral. We said, aha, there it is. That is the list of dirty, filthy, nasty items we don't want to look at, and we don't want anyone else to see them either. We dare not take this inventory. But Bill went to the dictionary again and looked up the word moral, and it is not a list of dirty, filthy, nasty items. He wanted us to make a list of the things that he probably would have said immoral, but he said moral, and the dictionary says that means the truth about facts. Moral means truth. So I made a searching and fearless, truthful, moral inventory of ourselves, our stock and trade that we were going to inventory our thinking. I am terrible at upkeeping on scrolling through this. I so apologize. So we set up to 4, disclose the damage on unsaleable thinking and get rid of it promptly without regret, because that is the very thing that blocks us from God's will. If my thinking is okay, then God can probably direct my will, and I'll be successful in the business of staying sober. If my thinking is lousy, then God cannot direct my will, and he probably be unsuccessful and end up broke and getting drunk. So I'm going to do the same thing in step 4 that he told me to do with the business inventory. Just seeing how much we have left here. Okay. So go back to page 64, paragraph 3. Resentment, re-feeling, is the number 1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease, for we had not only mentally and physically ill, we had been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. In number 1, dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, principles whom we were angry. And 2, we asked ourselves why we were angry. And 3, in most cases, found out that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, ambitions, and personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore. We were burned up. We have learned the threefold disease: physically, mentally, and spiritually sick. If I am physically sick, I would go to the doctor. Whatever illness I had would have certain symptoms and be readily identifiable to diagnose and treat. If I'm mentally ill, I would go to a psychiatrist. My mental illness would have symptoms too, make it possible to diagnose and to treat. If I'm spiritually ill, I also display certain symptoms. The big book breaks these down so that we can readily identify them when they appear, which is resentment, fear, and guilt and remorse. So if I want to get rid of what blocks me from God, I have to get rid of resentment, fear, and guilt and remorse. This is the process we are now beginning. So if those things can leave my head and stop being the underlying basis of my thinking and decision-making, God will come in and start redirecting me to better things. And this is the prescription. The big book is offered to help you get well. So the lovely stuff. We're going to go into the 4-step inventory process. Like I said at the beginning, this is not as scary as you think. And like Joe and Charlie were just saying, this isn't our life story. If you write down your life story, it's not going to help you because you already know what happened. And if you're blackout drunk, you can probably know what led up to those things. You already know your life story. And it's not going to help anybody else knowing your life story either to write it down. So we are going to follow exactly what the big book tells us to do for a 4th step inventory. So resentments are the number 1 offender. From these thoughts or mental attitudes forms all spiritual disease. We have instructed to list all of the people, institutions, and principles who we were angry at or had resentments. So what is a resentment? I love going into the definitions of these words. Webster's dictionary defines resentment as indignation or ill will felt as a result of real or imaginary offense. Then Webster refers to the reader to the word anger and gives other examples of this thoughts or feeling, which include rage, fury, ire, wrath, resentment, and indignation. These words denote various degrees of displeasure from anger, string intense and explosive. The longer lasting resentment, ill will, suppressed by anger, generated by a sense of being wronged or being wrong. Okay. In summary and broadly defined, we are dealing with a negative or unpleasant thought of being caused by the real or imagined act or a failure of a person or institution or principle. And C, persons, institutions, or principles may need some explanation. Remember, some of this grammar in here. Your action or failure may act very well, cause you to think or feel badly. Generally, this is called guilt. Institutions are any group of people, authorities, companies, government agencies, or organizations. So a principle is a basic truth or natural law. Most of these principles have a due to offend us because they get in the way of us getting what we want, or need to fill some lack or inadequacy of sense of self. For example, alcoholism is incurable, progressive, and fatal illness. Honesty is the best policy. As you give, you shall receive. There is no free lunch. When you are disturbed, there is something wrong with you. Live and let live, or forgive and forget. So preparing the grudge list. With the previous instruction in mind and proceeding any further with this inventory, a list should be prepared of the people, institutions, and principles which have or now cause you to have resentments, as defined as above. So certain points can be remembered. One, if you can remember the resentment, you should list it, even if you think you are over it. Go back through your life. Nothing counts but thoroughness, and honesty. A review of family albums, school albums, previous jobs may be helpful. Some people write a short autobiography to jar the suppressed memories, but in no way would take place of the actual inventory. Once you begin writing your grudge list, you have the heavens open up and names seem to fall from the sky, if by magic. I personally like to do it the way Bill did, by praying and being still. Let God put the thoughts in your minds. And you're supposed to be working on the present moment, not the 1001 distractions that your mind is yelling at you for. And you'll see. So throughout taking this step 5, at times thereafter, you'll recall people, institutions, principles that have caused you negative thoughts and feelings. You can add them to the list at any time, but don't spend too much time searching in the past. Once a flooded name cease, it seems to move on. You'll be doing this again in a year or two. Simply do your best. 1 week per section is more than enough. If they're dragging their feet, or if they don't really want to do this, which is the big book suggests sponsors moving on to something more willing. And don't worry about like missing people, which I kind of got all caught up in. That's why later in step 10, where we continue to take personal inventory, we'll have learned how to do that, and we can continue to do that. And don't concern yourself with whether you should or should have not have the feeling. Just make the list. There's nothing more required of you at this point. So read page 65. Paragraph 1. So our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations that had been interfered with? And then, okay, scroll here. So the glossary of words used in the steps 4 and 5. Exact, nature, wrong, fault, mistake, defect, so on and so forth. You can read through those on your own to know the exact definition. So notes, if there's ever a word or a concept you don't understand, know this. You must look it up. You must find its true meaning, because this will change everything for you. However, be aware that many egos only pretend to know the true meaning of things. They will tell you a skewed definition. So be aware that there's no substitute for doing your own homework. Like I was saying before, when it had on the previous page, like what is resentments and said in Webster's dictionary, as I'm sure I'm not the only alcoholic that's an overthinker and tries to think their ways through everything, which does not work. But I ended up looking up all these words in the big book because my vocabulary is not as good as I thought it was. And something as simple as the 4th step made a searching and fearless moral inventory. I picked up the book thinking moral was exactly all those dirty, nasty, horrible things, which in fact, it just means truth. So that is a good suggestion if there's something we don't know, or sometimes it's good to just look up things to know the full definition. Sometimes, like, I only have a partial understanding of certain things. So dictionary is helpful, or Google. So now we'll scroll to the resentment inventory. So a list of people, institutions, and principles that hold the key to some of the latent grudges you've been hiding under the rug. They almost may jar your memory, still others that aren't listed. So you can add as you see fit. So see, as they like separated this here, it says like mom, dad, sister. My list started out somewhere like this too. Typically all the people that are close to you appear to come up pretty fast. So, and then, previous jobs, all that kind of stuff there. I even put political parties and, and then there's certain principles. So these are just to kind of, you don't have to do all these. They're just, get your memory going. And remember that they're just suggestions to unlock a mind that's been sealed for an entire lifetime. So it won't be easy if you're not completely convinced that you must do this in order to live, and that way, without, you'll surely die. Once you begin, new ones will certainly come along the way, and God will guide you for success. In step 4, Bill's business inventory compared to personal. So yeah, he did the fact finding, which means searching, fact facing, which is fearless, truth, moral. Just puts it here for a good reference. So these block me from God's will. Access to God's will is where the power comes from that will help me overcome my alcoholism. Myself, trying to live a life based on self-reliance is the power to succeed. I have proven this to myself over and over, which is why without a thorough inventory, I may never get over my drinking. Self-reliance has failed me. I cannot free while these items are still stored inside of me. I cannot make sound, rational decisions while they are a base of my reasoning, and I cannot be recovered from a seemingly hopeless condition of body and mind where they are negatively, inherently affecting the course of my life. A businessman cannot fool himself about the value of his products, just as much as an alcoholic cannot fool himself about the effectiveness of his thinking. Okay. So we actually finished week 7 and finished week 8 perfectly. Next time we will continue with how it works. Next week might not be that long. Week 10 we are going to continue and 11. So we're really going to dive into how it works with the 4 steps. So if anyone hasn't done them or needs to do them again, this is a good way to go back through them. I know I'm enjoying kind of re-going back through this again because it's been a while since I finished my my steps. When I've had 2 sponsors in my multiple periods of sobriety. But both of the 4 steps were done as per the big book. They were basically the same. I noticed within myself, my understanding changed. I noticed the first time I tried to get sober, I wasn't fully committed to the steps, and I noticed my 4th step was not as thorough. And it was a lot more, it was a way longer list of people that I was mad at. And I drank again. So when I was fully committed to making that decision to turn my will over to the care of God as I understand him in step 3 this time, and this is the longest I've been sober, thank God. I noticed my 4th step actually wasn't as lengthy as I originally thought, because once we really start letting God in our lives, we understand our part, and that's the whole purpose of this. And I really realize that I'm a self-centered, selfish human being. And yeah, it's a lot to look at. That guilt, shame, and remorse, it really is. But it's nothing I didn't know. Like they said, writing your life story, it's nothing you didn't know. You knew. I knew I was selfish and self-centered. I knew that. But this gave me a way to start thinking about other people. And that is the solution, because thinking of me and only me was my problem. So step 4 gives me that solution through God, that we now are sober and think about other people and how we affect other people. That's step 4. And yeah, I'm excited to go through this. I hope somebody got something out of this, and I will see you next week when we continue on with the study. Thanks for letting me share.